Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining with us today. So we have a session today, getting started with the server-side JavaScript. So we have our speaker and Ivan Rajan, and he's one of the best marketing cloud architect in the globe, and he's one of the best in development side. So I would request Ivan to introduce yourself, and then you can start the session. Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I think you oversold me a bit. I don't think that high of myself, but thank you very much for those compliments. All right, guys. So the session of today is all about server-side JavaScript, basically a bootcamp. So my need here and my goal is to give you all the tools so you can start working with it or continue working with it, or at least kind of demystify the whole language, what it does, where do we use it, use cases, etc. So if you guys have any questions, I will answer after each part or each chapter that I will explain. You will have normally the opportunity to ask me questions so I can verify that you got everything. So let's just dive in, and let me share my screen. Okay, now you should be seeing my screen. Okay, before we start, a little word about myself. If you don't know me, I'm Ivan Razin. I live in Belgium. I'm actually not a consultant. I am a client, so I work as an internal employee for an energy company here in Belgium, and I work technically as a technical analyst, right? So I'm not even a marketing cloud developer officially, but marketing cloud development is what I do. And in doing so, when I started work with marketing cloud, I started a blog that most people know about. Well, most people know about me from this blog. That you can see here. It has a lot of, well, it has like 50-something articles about Ampscript, mostly server-side JavaScript. And it's a good place also to start learning and see some interesting use cases or applications. I also recently started another website that is fully dedicated to server-side JavaScript. It's not very known so far. I haven't did much advertisement for this. But the goal of this website is basically give you guys a code base with different parts that exist nowhere on the web, like give you a short snippet that you can reuse right away, give you the full code and see the results that Marketing Cloud would normally give you. So that's about it. Now let's start with a presentation. And yeah, let's talk about server-side JavaScript in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So first obvious question is what it is. It's a programming language that uses JavaScript syntax to interact with Marketing Cloud. So in short, in order to use server-side JavaScript, you have to have the basics of regular JavaScript. Regular JavaScript, but by what I mean regular, is a plain JavaScript. It's a client-side language. Basically, it executes in your browser, right? And the biggest difference with server-side JavaScript is that server-side JavaScript, like the name says, executes on the server. So it's something that have already finished executing when your page is loaded, shows you content, right? It can perform most of the Ampscript tasks. So if you're familiar with Ampscript, then you will be not surprised to see some reoccurrences here. And it uses some JavaScript features that are not present in Ampscript that are very, very useful, like functions, objects, more complex loops that Ampscript uses, and so on. And it has one big advantage over Ampscript is that it has error handling. All right. So in Ampscript, you know that if you make a mistake, a typo or something like this, it can result in only one outcome, is the error 500, meaning that it's a server error, you don't have a message, you don't know what happened, you don't know what's wrong, so you go line by line, and you try to debug by, for example, removing several lines and seeing which part of your code the error occurs. And that's extremely complicated if your AMP script is like 4 pages long or something like that, obviously. Now, do you guys have any questions so far? I guess not. All right, no. I will continue to the next chapter. Yeah, how does server-side JavaScript compare to Ampscript? Right. There are both server-side languages. So as I explained, it's something that is done before your page is rendered, right? A server-side language can interact with Marketing Cloud platform, and well, it can interact with different parts of the Marketing Cloud platform. An example that you see on the right is one where you retrieve some records from a data extension, right? It's just an example. Same thing can be done with Ampscript. Obviously, it's even a bit shorter. So for doing simple stuff like this, Ampscript could be suitable, but not always. And I will explain that later. So you can retrieve, write, delete data extension records, trigger customized emails, display hide different elements according to conditions. So for me, server-side JavaScript has mostly, in most cases, well, the sky is the limit for this language in Marketing Cloud, except for some parts that have not been yet integrated with it, but I will probably talk about that later. For example, I haven't found a solution to retrieve all the SMS messages or the list of all SMS messages directly from Mobile Studio, but there's no API for that, basically. But that's beside the point. Okay, so Ampscript, even though it's an inferior language, well, it's actually not. It's kind of a scripting language. It's not really a programming language, but it has some advantages over server-side JavaScript, and I'll show you how to overcome those lacking parts. All right. So the next obvious question is, what can Ampscript do that server-side JavaScript can't? Well, there's a list. Ampscript can natively create, retrieve, and update Salesforce objects. So if you know the functions, or as they call the methods, create Salesforce object, you can create an object directly in Salesforce via this native integration. You can basically retrieve a Salesforce object, update a Salesforce object, a single Salesforce object in this case. Those things server-side JavaScript cannot do out of the box. Next, Ampscript can encrypt and decrypt data using Marketing Cloud key management application, right? So if you want something to be encrypted, normally you would do that with Ampscript. Server-side JavaScript has no integration, no function, at least, that mimics this operation. But I will show you how I do integrate Ampscript with server-side JavaScript in this case. Third, Ampscript can create email attachments. So again, advantage Ampscript. I have not found a reliable way to do it directly in server-side JavaScript, but again, I haven't tried the hybrid method. I will explain to you what the hybrid method is to see if that would work. But here it is. Ampscript can format, convert, and manipulate date, time, and regional offset in one line of code. So this is one of the parts that can be debatable. So basically, if you want to perform some format, convert, manipulate data operations in server-side JavaScript, it's going to be complicated. You'll have to do some math calculations and so on. Why? Because, and I'm going to be telling you this in advance, there's JavaScript that is behind server-side JavaScript, right? So the basic language is an old version of JavaScript. So it does not have all the different functions that we would normally use to manipulate dates and to format dates in current iteration of the JavaScript. So we have to go through math and other calculations. But in Ampscript, you can do it just with, I don't know, a couple of methods like format date, give it a format, how it should be displayed, the language, etc. So super easy. In server-side JavaScript, unfortunately, yeah, you'll have to suffer for it. Next, yeah, Ampscript can natively encrypt and decrypt URL parameters. Okay, so let me give you some explanation about that one. What Ampscript can do is using a function that is normally dedicated for cloud pages to encrypt with some unknown algorithm different parameters that you want to pass in the URL. So basically, what you will see in the URL is one parameter, QS, like this on the right, QS, which is equal to, well, a string of characters, basically. And this string of characters, it's an encrypted, all of the parameters that you pass in the functions, but in their encrypted form. And I've been assured that this is unbreakable. We don't really know with which algorithm and how it is encrypted, but I've been assured by one professional in our fields that is basically you will have to spend thousands of years trying to decrypt this one. Although with, you know, AI and everything on the rise, we'll never know. For now, this is a very reliable method to encrypting those parameters. And to retrieve those parameters from the URL, you don't have to have a function or a method that would say like decrypt this particular parameter. No, you just have a regular request parameter method in Ampscript, and it will decrypt it automatically. So you don't have to do extra work. So that is it. And that's going to be the next chapter. Do you guys have any questions so far? Am I going too fast? I hear nobody, so I would assume that is okay. All right, next part. What can server-side JavaScript do that Ampscript cannot? Next obvious question. Let's see. Server-side JavaScript can give you the reason why an error has occurred. Yes. So this is a big one. Huh? So, well, it was a big one a couple of months ago. For now, not so much. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the latest release, but now when we preview a cloud page, for example, the cloud page, if an error has occurred, will display you the error, which was not the case since the inception of cloud pages. But for now, we have this way of debugging. But when we talk to server-side about server-side JavaScript, it can give you, well, a lot of information about the error. At least you can understand in which part of your code the error occurred. The only caveat, I think, is that you have to use the try and catch function that you should always use to catch errors. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. So that is it. Now, server-side JavaScript can also switch business units. So this is specific to WebSocket proxy. I will explain to you what WebSocket proxy is next. It's one of the what I call libraries in server-side JavaScript. And basically what it can do, if you provide it with the ID of your business unit, you can switch virtually to that business unit in your code and make requests in that particular business unit. For example, if you need to aggregate data from a data extension that one is on one business unit and the other is in the other business unit, well, you can first do a retrieve on your business unit, then switch business units with set client ID function, and then make another request and get the records from the other business unit. At the end, you would do reset client IDs, which switch you back to whatever business unit you were in originally, and then the request will be over. All right, up next. Server-side JavaScript can retrieve data extension properties such as field attributes. Yeah, in Ampscript, you can retrieve a lot of things, but apparently you cannot retrieve actual properties of a data extension. Which properties are we talking about? It's the name of the field, the max length of the field, is the field required, what is the type, what is default value, and what is the ordinal. Ordinal, it's something that is hidden by default. Ordinal is basically the order in which your field should be displayed in that extension. Now, the interface does not necessarily respect that order, but at least we can retrieve that value and use it somehow in our code. All right. Up next, yeah, this is an example of the result of the request that we've seen earlier. So this is a simple request to retrieve data extension fields based on a data extension customer key or external key that you see when you access a data extension. And this is the kind of result that you get. You don't have all, you cannot retrieve all the different properties. Some of them are not retrievable, unfortunately, but the most important ones that you can see here in the calls or column variable, you can. Next up, server-side JavaScript can process more than 2,500 data extension records at a time. This is also a big one. So in Ampscript, what you would usually do, you would try to look up rows, retrieve as many records as you would like, but you would not be able to go beyond 2,500 records. That's a Marketing Cloud limitation. But if you use the WebSocketProxy library in server-side JavaScript, you would be able to basically loop your retrieve requests. Let's see. I will show you probably an example later on. You can basically loop your requests and retrieve all the records from that extension. Now, if we're talking about 100,000 records, you can do it in about 25 minutes. If it's beyond that, you would be advised to use the SQL query because it is faster, but not necessarily suitable. All right. Server-side JavaScript can use list variables or arrays and functions. So what do I mean by that? So a list, well, in Ampscript, you can sort of use lists, but it's really a chore, right? You can basically define a separator in your variable and would say, okay, you have that many keywords, they're separated by a comma, made a list out of them, and then you would create a for loop, and you would go through that for loop and go through each element. Well, it's a nightmare to manage. I believe I have an example later on. And also for the functions in Ampscript, unfortunately, you could not make a function, meaning that you cannot have something reusable, a logic that is reusable, right? So you would have to write your Ampscript blocks one after another, basically repeating itself if you want to interact with different parts of, I don't know, Marketing Cloud, instead of using a function that would just repeat your code. And next up, Yeah, server-side JavaScript can use 4 types of loops. Ampscript cannot. Ampscript has basically, yeah, a couple of loops, I believe. But in server-side JavaScript, you have more. So you can have a while loop, a do-while loop, a for loop, a for-in loop, a switch. So it's a lot more flexibility for you, and you can use it in different scenarios. It's basically more liberty in action. All right. Next up, server-side JavaScript can use REST API to interact with Marketing Cloud Platform. Well, technically, Ampscript can do that as well, but not as flexibly as server-side JavaScript. And the last one is server-side JavaScript can set and get HTTP headers. So HTTP headers is something that is sent while you send information, your data from one page to another. That request includes some headers. Those headers can be set by a cloud page, for example, on the Marketing Cloud side to respond with other sets of headers. And those headers can be related to security, like you can see here on the right. I will not go much into detail, but this kind of headers should be included in all landing pages to prevent, for example, JavaScript cross-site scripting attack or something like that. It can basically also, like you can see on the top, restrict the methods that the data is sent to that particular page. For example, you can only allow the request of type post to be sent to your page, but not the type get, something like that. And of course, server-side JavaScript can write and read cookies, which is, well, the usefulness of this is also debatable since we're going towards a cookieless world nowadays, but at least we have that functionality working at the moment that you can also use to store some information in the browser of your customer and then reuse later in some context. And most importantly, yes, server-side JavaScript can use Ampscript to cover up for its shortcomings. For example, by passing the variable between the two languages. So what the example here on the right shows is basically a part of code that would do something in server-side JavaScript, then pass it down to Ampscript and let Ampscript execute the rest. So it's totally possible to work with both languages on the same page, right? Okay. Any questions? Yeah, don't we have any encryption functions in server-side JavaScript? Well, yeah, Cloud Pages URL, basically to encrypt your parameters in the URL, but natively, no. It is possible to use a mix of Ampscript and server-side JavaScript. I will show you later how I do this. There are several methods how you can write this, but that's it. Okay, no new questions. Let's go to the next part. When to use server-side JavaScript? Well, I personally use it mostly in Web Studio and Journey Builder. So while creating cloud pages to capture information from the customers, and in automation script activities to process some data. For example, in script activities, I would get some data from a data extension. I would process it, meaning that I would maybe transform it. I will do something that SQL cannot do. And then I would write the data back in the same data extension or another data extension. It really depends on what your goal is. Or, for example, you can send requests to an API, something that the SQL queries also cannot do. And we don't have a API request activity in the Automation Studio as of yet. So this is one of the applications of server-side JavaScript. All right, so it can capture data from a form and update records. So, and this is, I will try to give you guys a demo how the form handler technique works, but in most pages that I'm building, I'm separating the processing page from the page where the customer fills out the form. So basically, I have a first page where you have the form with, I don't know, first name, last name, email, something like that. Customer will fill out that form, click on send, and the data will be sent to another cloud page. And that cloud page can capture that data with this method that you can see on the right. So platform request get post data. You can capture it as a JSON, then use it to write in a data extension, for example, right? Why would I do something like this? Because I prefer to have my processing units and my forms and other pages be separated. And also it gives me the opportunity to have several forms send the data to the same Marketing Cloud page for processing, and that page will handle the data of every different form, maybe differently depending on the parameters and the data that we send. All right. We want to use server-side JavaScript when we want to retrieve data from all business units. Also, as mentioned previously, this is something that other languages do not necessarily know how to do. You cannot with an SQL just switch business unit and retrieve data. If you are in a if you are not in the main business unit, if you're in a sub business unit, you cannot switch to the parent business unit and do something in SQL or in Ampscript. So you have to use server-side JavaScript in order to switch the business unit, do your retrieve, switch back, do something else. Yes, even though you can use it in cloud pages and automation script activities, it doesn't necessarily mean that it cannot be used in emails and SMS messages to simplify some tasks. I'd like to say in advance that, yeah, some server-side JavaScript snippets would work, or functions would work in SMSs and emails. But for example, the part that I just showed you that relies on WebSocket proxy, and can switch business units, unfortunately, doesn't work in emails, for instance. For which reason, I am not really sure, but there must be one. So you can use server-side JavaScript switch function to write a shorter code. Well, it's up to you to see if that's shorter, but if you have many kind of, well, in principle, Ampscript will always be longer because you have to repeat the code if you use such function as switch. It is, for me at least, clear what the function actually does. Next, you can reformat dates in the sentence. Yeah, in this example, this is a pretty complicated example. It shows the comparison between the two languages, how you would reformat a date. Above, you have a date that has a period as separator. So it would go day, month, then year. I'd like to transform this in something that Marketing Cloud can actually read. And then I would use a regex, so a regular expression, to kind of identify where the separator is and to how to replace it. But that's a bit, yeah, that's a bit complicated. I never worked with regular expressions. It would seem like Chinese to you. Let's go next. Use custom functions for repetitive tasks. Again, if you want to write it in Ampscript, it will be way longer because you cannot reuse the same code. You will have to write it twice. And here on the right, you have an example that uses for client 1 and client 2 the same function to calculate a yearly consumption. And below, you see one part of the code for client 1, and for the client 2, it will be the same, except that some variables will have different values. All right. Any questions now? All right, I see nothing in the chat. So I will proceed. How to use server-side JavaScript. The same manner, it can be used as a block or an inline statement, comparatively to Ampscript. On the right here, you have an example. Well, the script HTML tag basically defines the area where your server-side JavaScript will live. And in that area, you will be doing, I don't know, whatever has to be done. And then below, when the script tag closes, you can use the different parts of the previous code to display different values. So basically, if you define a variable mygas in the block of server-side JavaScript above, you can use this weird HTML tag ctrl :var to actually display the value of the variable. Or you can use ctrl :eval to render your function that you define in your server-side JavaScript. And that's what I just explained. So you have ctrl fields. Basically, we'll fetch the data from the profile attributes or the data extension. If you're in your email, ctrl var will basically look for a server-side JavaScript variable if it was defined prior. ctrl :eval will basically render whatever needs to be rendered if it's a JavaScript expression, like a function. Now, in the block statement, you can, of course, write several lines of code and include try-catch function to capture all the errors that might happen. So this is what you will always see in the code on my website, is that I always, if I have a production kind of code, I will always use a try-catch function. Without it, it can give you, well, error 500 in some cases. It will give you some weird errors, maybe white screen, no content. It really depends, but by using try-catch, you can really see where the error had occurred. Of course, as I showed previously, you can use Ampscript and server-side JavaScript together. I would not necessarily recommend it, but you can. So you can start something in server-side JavaScript, then close the tag, write something in Ampscript, close it, start again with server-side JavaScript, and etc. Totally possible. Not very clean, but possible. And since Ampscript is forbidden in script activities, you can use a magical function that is called treat as content to write Ampscript within the JavaScript syntax. That's what I meant when I was talking about mixing Ampscript and server-side JavaScript. So in this example, well, basically this example you can use in a script activity, right? Because there is no Ampscript here. There is Ampscript, but it's rendered through the treat as content function. So basically, I write my Ampscript as several lines of text, and then I convert this text, well, I execute this text as if it was Ampscript. It's a bit complicated. Let's, I will probably show you another example later on, and maybe in a demo, it will be clearer. But basically, the principle is, if there is something that server-side JavaScript cannot do, but Ampscript can, you can use the treat as content function to execute it and write it as a piece of text. And that's how you would, for example, decrypt or encrypt a variable. All right. No any questions? All right, let's go to the next part. What are server-side JavaScript libraries and objects? Okay, this is a bit technical, but bear with me. Right. So server-side JavaScript has two built-in libraries and a special proxy object to help us out. So the proxy object is WebSocket proxy that I showed you earlier when it was used to switch between business units. Now the platform library, it's the basic library in server-side JavaScript. You can use it out of the box, and it works more or less in the same way that Ampscript works. You always prefix it with platform, then dot, then something. In this case, it's function, and lookup. And then you look up in that particular data extension, that particular field where the first name is equal to John and the last name is equal to Snow. And then you render the result on your page. Pretty straightforward. Then you have what we call a core library. So in order to use the core library, so core library is basically, again, a set of functions that you can use. But in order to use it, you first have to load it, and you load it with this line that you can see on line 3, platform load core 1. Once you did it, you will be able to use its functions here. Okay, I will address that a bit later. All right, so let me see. Yeah, this is a good example, actually. So one of the functions that you'll always be using is the write function, right? Render something. It's the equivalent of output or output line in Ampscript. If you want to write it using a platform function, it's going to be platform.response.write. But if you're going to be using a core function, you just write, same for stringified. I believe there is an equivalent in the platform, but I always use this one. It's just one line of code that you add at the beginning of your server-side JavaScript, and then you can use shorter terms. Some of them, yeah, you have to learn how to use them. For example, data extension set of functions, you have to first initiate that extension by name or the customer key. And then you have sub-functions like retrieve rows, lookups, etc., etc. So you can do a lot of stuff with it. And then the last one, so the special proxy object, as I call it, is the WebSocket proxy. You call it by like this. Basically, if you look at the line 5, I call the variable API. So basically, you call this object and you put it in a variable, and then you use that variable to access its functions. For example, I have a retrieve function. It works in this matter. You give the name of your object that you want to access. That extension object is basically a data extension record. Then you put the name of the fields. In this case, it's the email address. And then you put a filter. A filter looks exactly, well, more or less exactly like the SOAP filter, because it uses a SOAP API to perform this request behind the curtain. And this is how you get it working. But earlier, I already showed you how to switch between business units. And this is how you can do it. Now, what are marketing climate APIs? Let's see. I saw that I have a question wrapped around Ampscript. Well, basically, yeah, sorry. I have the impression that basically it uses the same rendering engine as Ampscript. So when I wrote it a couple of years ago, I certainly made something by it. But for now, I'm not really sure, to be honest. How do we use server-side JavaScript in custom preference subscription center in Marketing Cloud? That's a really big subject. It really depends how you build it. So if you want to build a custom preference subscription center, you have to define how you will manage your subscription. It's going to be consent-based, if it's consent-based or list-based. So basically, you have two choices. You can store your subscription details in a list. You can store it in a data extension, and then you can interact with server-side JavaScript. You can interact with both. You can update a list. You can update a data extension. If you use a data extension, you can basically store more data in it and then synchronize that data with Salesforce, for example. But it will come down to you building first a web page, so a cloud page, let's say, with a form and with the different parts that people can just go to that page and fill out their information and click on, I don't know, save, for example. It will update something in Marketing Cloud. So that page would send the data to another page where you would have either Ampscript or server-side JavaScript that will process the data and write into lists, different data extension, or integrate with Salesforce directly through Ampscript. It really depends on what you want to achieve, how do you want to build it. There are several ways of how you can achieve that, but custom preference center, that's what it means. You build it yourself. You decide which technology you want to use. All right, let's go to the next chapter. What are Marketing Cloud APIs? All right. So, any question? All right, you're welcome. Well, an API, it's a programming interface. Basically, Marketing Cloud has like two APIs that are very different in their concepts and integrate with different parts of Marketing Cloud. One of the APIs is sort of free, let's say, to use. The other one has a limit of requests that you can do, I believe, per year. That it's debatable if Salesforce monitors it or not. But let's go ahead and discover what that is exactly. So the APIs I'm talking about is the SOAP API and the REST API. All right. SOAP API, it's basically requests that use XML syntax that you can see on the right. It's really difficult to write. When you want to interact with using this API, basically you have to write this much. Yeah, it's not HTML, it's XML. So basically it's also sort of the same language. It uses tags that can open, close, have arguments, well, properties, values, etc., etc. So it's pretty complicated to use it if you really want to use it bare without server-side JavaScript. This is how you would go by it. So if you're using Postman, Postman is a software that you can use to test your API request. You'll be putting in the body of the request that much code in order to send your request. It grants access to Contact Builder and Email Studio in a nutshell, right? So it would be here and here. But if you write it in server-side JavaScript, you can see that the syntax went from this mess to something structured, which is way better, right? You can see some similarities here. You see that, for example, to filter on your request, so basically say, okay, retrieve the email address of a person where the first name equals to John. This is how you write it in XML, but in server-side JavaScript, you're just using an object, but you're using the same key. So left operand, property, property, simple operator, simple operator. So it's basically using SOAP behind the scenes in order to do your request. So using WebSocket proxy doesn't cost you anything. SOAP, for now, as I hear, it's free. You can use it as much as you want. Then for the rest, again, there's a limited number of calls that you can do per year. They give you a lot of calls, but still, this is something to be monitored. And this is how you would go by it. So the particularity of REST API is that you have to first generate a token. You Marketing Cloud APIs, different keys, you generate a token, and you use that token to send a second request to retrieve data from different parts of Marketing Cloud, like Automation Studio. You want to retrieve the list of all the automations. You can do that by running this code. You want to retrieve the list of all the journeys, I don't know, emails, different blocks. You would use that particular API. While I'm talking about this on the web, you can actually find Postman library. Wait. Here, let me make it bigger. Where you can have a look at all the different things that you can do in Marketing Cloud. You also have Pardot, Salesforce CDP, Salesforce Commerce, etc., but that's not the subject of this presentation. So you have messaging and journeys, REST API, for example, you want to, I don't know, create contacts. And this is how you do it. This is an example of how you create your body, how you do the whole request. So basically, you can use Postman to test your API, but you can then put it in server-side JavaScript to do it programmatically, depending on the data that you receive. And there's a lot of things that you can do. You can really explore and see. For example, for an SMS, you could create a keyword from messaging, send an email, get the status of the email. So as you can see, you have data extensions. You can create a data extension. You can interact with automations, with subscribers, users, etc., etc. So there's a lot of possibilities there. And you can use it in server-side JavaScript. No any questions, guys? All right. What are the limitations of server-side JavaScript? So, as always, there are some pros and cons when it comes to a programming language. As I said previously, well, server-side JavaScript uses an older version of JavaScript. ECMAScript 3, to be precise. Now we're at version 6 already, just to give you an idea. That means that most of the methods that you will find online to use in your JavaScript, server-side JavaScript, will probably not work. For example, here on the right, you can see the syntax for ECMAScript 3. Right? You have to create a for in loop, go through your data, and then show the results. In ECMAScript 6, it will be easier if you use a map function and the arrow syntax in order to achieve what you want to achieve. And it's way shorter, it's clearer, but unfortunately, you could not really use it. And here is a small graph to see when the ECMAScript 3 was actually active. And I believe the level of Marketing Cloud JavaScript is at the level of the year 2000. So that's how far we are. Then again, if we're talking about HTML emails, it's more or less the same. we're still at that level of technology. Next, wait, before we go to the next part, let me just quickly show you something else. There is a great article written by Greg Gifford about what we call polyfills. If you don't know what polyfill is basically a subset of functions for each type of variable. For example, if you have a variable, well, not a variable, but a content type of content. If you have, for example, a string, so a string of characters, you can use some JavaScript functions natively with it to, I don't know, to perform some tasks. Let me show you a quick example of what that actually means. If I just go any web page and I do a console log of new array. So I'm just creating an empty list here. And what you will see is that, well, a new array was created, but if you look inside of it, you can see here that it has something that is called prototype. And when you open it, you can see that there are a lot of functions. So the F means function, basically, that can be used with this type of content. So if you're using an array, you can use a fill, filter, find, flat, for each, whatever, right? In server-side JavaScript, most of these will not work. For each, for example, will not work. Find will not work. Entries obviously will not work. Slice will. Sort also. So there's a lot of, well, a lot of things that are lacking in the version of server-side JavaScript. But you can make up for it by creating an array or a series of functions. And in this article, Greg Gifford actually did that. For example, this bit of code defines the prototype for the content of type array, right? It's a prototype of some. So if you look at this is what he does. Basically, once this part of code is written at the beginning of your server-side JavaScript, you will be able to use .sum to actually perform some action, whatever that thing does with your array. And there's a lot of them. So you can really explore how this would work and what it does. For example, I have last index of. Last index of, it will look at the position of when the last occurrence of a character took place. What else do we have? Sum, reduce, etc., etc. So I invite you to, have a look at this article, see what can be done if in your code you want to use some shortcuts, some functions that don't exist in the current version of server-side JavaScript. All right, let's go back to the presentation. The second point is the documentation for server-side JavaScript is scarce. There's not a lot of sources where you can learn it from. Well, what I would usually recommend if you're learning anything related to Marketing Cloud, to go to SFMC Curated, which is a great aggregator for everything Marketing Cloud. And from there, you can probably find your answer. Then again, be prepared that the documentation the official documentation doesn't have everything that you need, right? Yeah. Again, what I said previously, server-side JavaScript doesn't include all the Ampscript functions. So normally you should be able to use the same functions in Ampscript, because Ampscript by default is inferior since it's not a real programming language. But unfortunately, yeah, stuff like creating Salesforce object, which is a native integration, doesn't exist in server-side JavaScript. So you kind of have to either use the two at the same time or kind of do the hybrid method. So include Ampscript as a text and then render it with the treat as content function. So you have to jump through some hoops in order to, to perform some tasks. Yeah, it has its own share of bugs. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work as intended. Sometimes the results, well, I will see later if I can show you an example on my website. Basically, sometimes you try to execute something, it doesn't work, but it's just because the core of the server-side JavaScript is faulty from the beginning. Again, you have to find that by yourself. Just don't trust it fully. Trust server-side JavaScript at like 99%. For the rest, be prepared to have some bugs along the way. Yeah, to lowercase. Okay, let's go through some useful resources if you want to learn server-side JavaScript. You have the official documentation, for example, for the API. Let's see. That will open. Yeah. So the official documentation, it's okay. Really, it's okay. It lacks sometimes some crucial information. It's not very user-friendly. If you're a developer, you might have enough what it says here, but not necessarily. It's really, yeah. If you want to start just using this documentation, that might not be enough. But for example, if you want to have access to Content Builder API, you can have different parts of what you can do. But then again, well, actually, they improved it a lot. I have to say, since the last time I checked, they improved it a lot. But still, how many examples do we have? We have 1, 2. Well, might not be enough. Anyway, just remember that there's an official documentation that you can use. There's a REST API 1.1 v1 reference. Yeah, this is also one of the links that is very useful if you want to have an overview of what REST API can do. Not everything is here, by the way. There are some undocumented API endpoints that you can use, but since it's undocumented, it's not recommended to use them, but you can still have them working for you in some cases. Well, there's quite a lot of content here that you can go through. Simple operators, like I showed you before. If you want to have a list of the SOAP operators to create filters, this is where you can find them. Well, let's say, for example, you want to use the in operator. So, okay, search for values in a specified list. You can include multiple in values in the filter part. Sounds fun. But what they don't say you is that there's a limit on the number of values that you can put in the in. And the limit is, I don't know, I believe it started failing for me after, I don't know, 20, something like that. So not all the information can be found here. I'm not even sure that they're aware of this issue. You can learn it also from some blog articles. REST API method, yeah, by Greg. So a lot of good content. Again, access script activities with REST API. I believe this is, no, I believe this is documented. Sometimes when Greg will reference not documented endpoints, he will tell you. These ones are okay. Oh, why not? I don't know. I put it as undocumented, but I believe I found something on the official website. Then you have my website, of course, then the one that I showed you before, SFMC curated. Weird error, but okay. Been created by one of the community group leaders in Paris, France. Just search whatever you want, like SSJS, for example. You'll find around 500 articles about it. And probably find your happiness here. And my latest website, that's the one I would recommend. Okay, the link is not working. I just go here. And on this website, I'm trying to, just give you all the different codes for whatever you want to achieve. It has the same structure as your Marketing Cloud business unit. So, and you can also have some references here. So I'm creating articles when I have time. I don't necessarily have everything here, but if, for example, you want to retrieve that accession record, you would go into Contact Builder, Records, Retrieve, and you have a choice of the different methods that you can use. You can use a core function that looks like this. Just copy paste this code and then change the customer key of your data extension. That should work. The results should look something like this. You can use WebSocketProxy. Again, you have the full code here. Just replace this part and you will be golden. This is how the result looks like. And then the REST API, well, obviously, it's supposed that you have an access token that you've retrieved from Marketing Cloud, and you use that access token in order to perform your API request. So if you're interested how to retrieve your token, let me in totally wrong browser. You can go and see it here. There's an example. Basically, you have to create an integration. You have to have a client ID, client secret, put it there. You have to have your subdomain. And once you have the token, so if I run this, I will receive a token. I can perform a REST API request and include the token in one of the headers and be done with it. Now, what else? I also included, well, I haven't fully tested it yet. It works on my side. Well, the last time I tried. So this is how I would create a Salesforce object by using the hybrid method. It looks a bit complicated, and it really is. But it allows me to use a solution fully in server-side JavaScript instead of, closing the script tag, creating my request in Ampscript, then pass the variable back to server-side JavaScript, and then render the results. This is how I do it. There are a couple of YouTube channels that you need to be aware of. They don't necessarily talk about server-side JavaScript. So there's SFMC Trailblazers by Shibu Abraham. It also a series of videos about SSJS. There's also a pretty recent channel, but it's also great by Cameron Robert. It also explains how to run server-side JavaScript in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So check those ones out. Now, guys, do you have any questions so far?
I think we don't have any questions as well. I want this great session. Really loved it for a step-by-step process at what you have shown to our audience. Really thank you for that, and really thank you for your time to spend with us today. It's really great session. Audience, anyone has any questions? I think there's a question. Is there any documentation?
Where we can see if Ampscript is more efficient, especially for common function, both like data extension. Okay. I only know of one LinkedIn article. So there is someone that I know that lives in Australia, that is very knowledgeable in Marketing Cloud, that created a server-side JavaScript library, basically. Wait, let me just show you this. It will not fully answer your question, but I'll just reference the guy. So he created this library that basically simplifies server-side JavaScript for you. So what I showed you is bare bones server-side JavaScript. He created a full library with all the different functions that you can use easily, but you have to call the library in the beginning of your code, right? And the guy on his LinkedIn account talked about the speed of these functions. I don't remember how it was called, but for sure. And let me doesn't seem right. Not the right guy. Oh, okay. That's my guy. And for whatever reason, I believe my LinkedIn is German. Very interesting. And yeah, if I would check that guy out, what he wrote on LinkedIn, I will probably find the article about that for sure. All right. That was it. Do we still have some time to show something in Marketing Cloud?
Audience, anyone has any other questions? No, Ivan, I think it's a great session. Of course, this is a weekend. Thank you for your time with us today.
All right, thank you for answering.
Yeah, it's a great session, Ivan. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. See you around. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.